We talked a lot about habits recently. So today I'd like to briefly sum up what we learned, what open questions remain, a few nice additions to round up and finish that topic. Welcome to the Soft Skill channel. My name is Sebastian Jung and today I've got another soft skill talk for you. And in today's talk I'd like to round up and finish the topic of habits. We discussed that a lot recently. We had two book reviews, Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg and Atomic Habits by James Clear. Today I will briefly summarize what habits are about. I will discuss some open questions that remain. I have a few additions about how we can establish new habits. And I'd like to talk briefly about the relationship between habits on one side and spontaneity on the other. So, first of all, what are habits all about? Habits are action procedures that are highly automatic, that occur without a lot of conscious thought and conscious attention, that we basically perform while being on autopilot. And those habits make up an important part of our daily actions. According to one study that Duhigg quotes, more than 40% of the actions we perform each day are actually habits, not the result of conscious thought. We discussed two books that deal with habits. The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg provides a lot of background information about how habits work and the research that went into that topic. So here we get a lot of background knowledge. And we discussed Atomic Habits by James Clear. This one provides a lot of tips and strategies for dealing with habits in our daily lives. Both books describe the basic structure of how habits work, the so-called habit loop. The habit loop consists of a few steps. First of all, we have a cue that triggers the habit. Then we have a response, that is the action we actually perform. And at the end, we will get a reward. And that is what keeps the habit loop going. James Clear points out that what motivates us is not actually the reward, because that only appears at the very end, but it is the craving for the reward. So in Clear's habit loop, we have cue, then craving, then routine or response, and then the reward. But of course, both explanations refer to the same kind of procedure. They just explain habits in a slightly different way. Let's have a look at some examples. Whenever I'm stressed, that is the cue, an emotional state. Whenever I'm stressed, I will take a break and smoke a cigarette. This is the routine. And the reward is that I will relax a bit, that I will experience some relief from being stressed. Now, it is important to point out that in this habit, it is not necessarily the cigarette itself that provides the reward. It could be, for example, that what I actually crave is to get away from my desk for a moment and to take a short break, and it might work just as well without the cigarette. Let's look at another example. After I turn on the television, this is the cue, a preceding action. After I turn on the television, I will get the box of cookies from the drawer or whatever. I will get the box of cookies and put it on the table, and I will eat the cookies while I watch TV. And this is the routine, putting the cookies on the table and eating them. And the reward is obviously tasty cookies. Or might be. In this case, it is interesting to point out that, of course, watching TV and eating cookies, that is not naturally related. I don't get hungry because I turned on the TV, and I don't develop an appetite for cookies because I turned on the TV. But in my mind, in my consciousness, TV and cookies are linked because I formed this habit. I have the impression that whenever the TV is running, I should get some cookies because that's how it was in the past. So this is an interesting mechanism that is part of a lot of habits. Let's look at a final example. Every Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock, I will go to the gym and I will work out for 1 hour. Here, the cue is the time, Tuesday evening 6 o'clock. The routine is going to the gym and working out, and the reward is maybe I enjoy the exercise and using my body, and maybe I am happy to do something for my health, something like that. And this brings us to a point I find difficult. Here we proceed to the open questions. Because both Clear and Duhigg use this term habit as an all-encompassing general term. However, from my point of view, we are talking about a wide range of phenomena here. A wide range, and on one end, one extreme we have are habits like chewing on your fingernails. Things that occur entirely unconscious, without any conscious intent, conscious thought, but you only notice you are doing it somewhere in between. Oh no, I'm chewing my nails again. I wanted to stop doing that. You never said to yourself, oh, I should start chewing my fingernails in the future. This would be a good idea. No, it occurred entirely unconsciously. Now, this is one extreme. And the other extreme are situations like the example I just described, where I say to myself, every Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock, I want to go to the gym and work out for 1 hour, where I make a specific plan. And I wonder how much automatism and routine can really develop here. I don't think I will ever reach a point where I suddenly realize, oh, I'm at the gym and I have been working out for half an hour. I didn't realize that. And this probably won't happen. Now, obviously, a big difference is that here, when it is about chewing your fingernails, the action, the routine, is exceedingly simple, while over here, when it is about going to the gym and so on, the action is complex and consists of a number of different parts. Let's consider another example. Let's say I made a plan to have a little bit of fruit with every meal, to eat more healthy, to have a healthier diet. Now, first of all, I have to actually buy that fruit when I go grocery shopping. And again, I don't think I will end up saying, oh wow, there are bananas in my shopping cart. I didn't actually realize I put them there. Next, I have to prepare that fruit to be present at my meals. Maybe I have to wash the fruit or peel it or something like that, so it is ready at the table when I have my meals. And finally, I have to eat the fruit. So we have a lot of different steps and complex actions here. So I wonder to what extent can this automation and creation of a routine really occur here? Because that is an important promise, especially of James Clear, that if we repeat the routine often enough, it will turn into a habit and it will become super easy and we don't have to think about it anymore. And I certainly believe that it gets easier if we've established a routine. However, I wonder if it will really turn into an unconscious habit at some point. I also think it is difficult to clearly distinguish what is a habit and what is not, and where a habit and where there is the line between a habit and conscious thought. What I realized in my own daily life is that sometimes I will consciously start a certain action, but the action itself will be pretty much on autopilot. This occurs for me, for example, when I prepare to leave my apartment and I get ready. I have to, of course, put on my shoes and I have to grab the things I take with me, such as my wallet or my keys. And as I experience it, I consciously make the decision, I will head out now, so I have to grab my things. But grabbing the things, that occurs automatically, because what happened a few times to me in the past was that while grabbing my things, I got interrupted. For example, someone said something to me, or the telephone rang, or I had some other thought, like, oh, the light is still on, I need to turn it off, or something like that. And let's say I had put my wallet into my pocket, but I hadn't taken my keys yet. And then I got interrupted. Then I sometimes failed to finish the process afterwards. So I would leave the apartment with my wallet, but without my keys. And of course, it was highly frustrating later. But yeah, so it seems to be an action that is consciously initiated, but that occurs on autopilot itself. So I think it is difficult to clearly distinguish. And what makes it even more difficult is that habits are often embedded in a larger context, in larger actions. For example, when I hear this term autopilot, what I think of first is walking around outside while thinking of something else and walking unconsciously. And the prime example for that, for me, was when I was back at school and I had to walk the same way to school each day for several years. And what occurred to me back there, what occurred sometimes was that I would leave home in the afternoon, for example, to visit a friend or to go to some shop. And I would start walking and I would be lost in thought. And then I would suddenly realize, wait, I'm going to school, but I actually wanted to go somewhere else. And I guess the habits that occurred there were probably based on location. Like, when I reach this crossing, I will turn left instead of right, something like that. I will turn left like I always do. But of course, those habits are embedded in a larger context, like walking around outside, whatever the reason, and so on. So I think it is difficult to clearly distinguish. And another issue here is that there are probably other situations where we experience this type of autopilot or automatic behavior, automatic actions. Think, for example, of the flow phenomenon. We had an own video about that a while ago. Briefly summarized, flow is a phenomenon where you are fully into some action you perform at the moment. Your mind is totally focused on that. You don't notice anything else. You don't notice what occurs in your surroundings. You lose your sense of time. you are fully focused on this action and it seems to be really easy. Everything seems to work on its own. So you have some kind of autopilot there as well. And as I understand things, this phenomenon of flow doesn't have anything to do with habits. It is a distinct phenomenon on its own, but it probably occurs in combination with habits a lot. For example, think of craftsmen who have really mastered certain procedures, such as a baker who is kneading the dough and forming breads, things like that. He might have a flow experience if he likes his work and enjoys his work and so on. But at the same time, since he has performed this procedure so many times, it might have also turned into a habit. So again, it is difficult to distinguish what exactly takes place. So I think there are some interesting points that are still open or still not very clear. It's not a major problem. I mean, it is a complex topic, so I wouldn't expect to understand everything about it on the first attempt. You can probably spend a lot of time delving into this topic and reading everything about it and so on, and you probably still won't know everything there is to know about it, and a lot of questions are probably still unanswered. But maybe in the future we will find some more interesting information, and some of those points might be cleared up. We recently discussed how we can change habits, how we can establish good habits, and I'd like to add a few points to that. I think one aspect that was not mentioned in the books, but that I believe to be important, is the matter of resources. And what I mean by resources are things like, first and foremost, time, but also effort, and also motivation and willpower, things like that. I think this is an important aspect to consider, because I think if you fail to establish a new habit in your lives, it often is because you neglect this aspect of willpower. I think it works like that. I make a plan. I want to be healthier, so I make a plan to do some workout, some exercise for 1 hour every Tuesday evening. And at first I'm all pumped up and exercise, great, and I will do that, I will get healthy. So I'm really motivated, and the first few weeks it works great. Now, however, the problem is, before I came up with that idea, I did other things Tuesday evening. I didn't sit around for an hour wondering, what should I do? I'm so bored. I did something else. It doesn't matter what I did. No, but when I started doing this 1 hour exercise, of course, I had to reduce those other activities. And that was fine for a while, for a few weeks, when I was all pumped and all motivated about the exercise. But once the novelty wears off and the excitement, then those other activities reclaim their space, reclaim their rights, and I probably end up saying, too bad, this Tuesday I ended up not having the time, not getting around to the exercise, and this happens more and more often. And after a while I stopped doing it altogether, and this approach to establish this new habit has failed. So I guess what's really helpful if you want to establish a new habit is to figure out where to take the resources for it from. Because you will need some time. So you need to take away time from other activities. You might also need to invest some effort. So you can't invest the same effort into something else. And I think it helps to figure that out beforehand. What you might want to do is to track your daily activities, maybe for a week or two, have a little sheet of paper ready, and throughout the day write down, I started doing this at that time and then that and whatever. So keep track of your activities so you get a good impression of how you actually spend your days. And then you can try to figure out which of those activities I perform are not that important to myself. Where could I take away, for example, 1 hour to invest into this new habit of, for example, exercising. I think this is a good approach to be able to stick to it in the long run. Another important aspect in regard to resources is that I would recommend to start slowly, to just change one thing at a time. So don't go like, oh, well, I will get healthy now, so I will start exercising and eating healthy and do stress management and meditate and whatnot and all at once. But start with just one habit. And once you've really managed to establish that, once you've managed to stick to it over a while, you can move on to the next step. This will be much easier because, again, willpower is also a limited resource. So it will be much easier to do it one thing at a time. For me personally, establishing new routines, new habits has always worked best when I tried to do it on a weekly basis. Like I will do whatever each Tuesday evening or each Saturday morning or Friday after work, something like that. You can also try to do things on a monthly basis, like first weekend of every month I will do whatever, but my experience is that this won't work out because the time in between is too long. You will forget about it. It will be difficult to keep track of the correct dates. So this never worked for me. And the same goes for doing things on a daily basis, like I will do whatever each day in the afternoon, something like that. That didn't work. That never really worked well for me either, because the days throughout a week are too difficult to really stick to that kind of schedule. Now, of course, it depends on the habit. For example, if your plan is to eat some fruit with every breakfast, and you have breakfast each day of the week, then this probably can work fine, because you have this situation where you have the same occasion each day. But for other habits, it really is a problem that the days are too difficult, especially too different, especially the working days and the weekend days. So what always worked for me best was to establish new habits on a weekly basis. No matter what habit you want to establish and how you go about doing it, I think the most important thing is to stick to it. And not to get distracted and demotivated if it doesn't work right from the beginning. You might need to do some tinkering and try out different things and experiment, but that's perfectly fine because it's a long-term process we're talking about here. So stick to it and things will work out. Finally, I'd like to say a few words about habits and spontaneity, because if we establish a lot of habits, if our daily lives include lots of habits, lots of routine, lots of planning, if all our days are planned in advance, in detail, emphasizing habits might lead to a situation where your days are planned in detail beforehand. And that isn't necessarily a bad thing. It is neither good nor bad, neither right nor wrong, but we have to keep in mind that on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have the idea of spontaneity, of not planning my evening in advance, but just saying, oh well, I have this evening right now, what do I want to do with it? How do I feel about it right now? What do I feel like doing right now? And again, this isn't better or worse, it isn't good or bad just as well, but it is also a valid way to go about things. And we should not focus too much on one extreme. We should try to maintain a balance to be able to do both. A while ago we talked about the square of values and development, and that nicely showcases this situation of two positive values that should be in a certain balance. Now both are valid and legitimate. If you establish lots of habits and do a lot of planning, plan your days in advance, it might seem a bit bureaucratic, a bit stiff, nothing is a surprise, everything is pre-planned, preordained. However, this doesn't need to be a disadvantage. It also means a somewhat relaxed approach where you don't need to wonder what will I do in the evening, because you have planned it in advance and you know, oh well, this is what I will do, and it makes things simpler to some extent. So as I said, both are valid and legitimate, and we shouldn't overemphasize one of them. We should try to be able to do both. We should be able to maintain a good balance. Well, those were some points I think that are interesting or unclear or still open regarding the topic of habits, and I think talking about them was a nice finish to the topic. For now, we might pick it up again in the future where there is new information, maybe another interesting book, but I think for now we've reached a good level of knowledge. Please let me know in the comments what are open points for you, what questions you are still wondering about. And maybe also let me know about your experiences dealing with habits in your daily lives. What are the things that worked great for you and that you would recommend to others? Please let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, I'd also be happy about a like or a subscription, no matter whether it is entirely spontaneous or routinely given. I'm quite happy either way. We will see each other in the next video. For today, I'll take my leave. Have a nice day. See you next time.